Hello there and welcome to the fourth in our first season of Raise the Roof podcast. I have to say that I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by two special guests who are going to talk us through the future of homes part one. And they're going to answer the question in terms of whether we are still letting homes like it's the 1950s or what the homes of the 2020s and beyond could look like. So absolutely chuffed to bits to be joined today by somebody who has had a long-standing influence on me, and that's Paul Taylor. Paul has had some great job titles, but I love his one at the moment, which is Innovation Coach at Bromford. If you don't know Bromford, they are a fab housing association that work across central England and own and manage in excess of 40,000 homes. Despite his youthful good looks, which of course you can't see on a podcast, Paul does actually confess to having worked in the housing sector for 20 years. And despite that, he still acts as the rebel with a cause rather than without a cause.
Hi, Nick. So I've interrupted you already. Sorry about that.
No, go.
Probably about 23 years, but I'm winding it down to make myself look a little bit longer.
It's a common trick that we all use, Paul. I'm nearly at that 30-year stage, and I'm now saying no. It's over 20 years. Paul regularly, as you could tell, acts as a disruptor to the housing sector. Doesn't follow the rules, and certainly doesn't follow a convention, which is what I love about him. He does regularly speak on a range of topics, most notably around innovation. But you probably also really know Paul because he's an avid tweeter and a frequent blogger and contributes to a raft of publications, both inside and outside the housing sector. I really sort of used to know and keep track of time because Paul's an avid worldwide traveller, and I knew that every 10 weeks he would be tweeting photographs from some part of the world that was on my bucket list. So, of course, since COVID, he's been struggling to get out and about. So he's changed his perspective on the world by buying a drone and then publishing lots of footage of how beautiful several parts of the UK are. He enjoys walking, he goes to the gym a lot, and he also competes in Fitbit leagues, as I know, because I used to lose to him week on week. So I ditched my Fitbit and got a Garmin instead because I thought at least Paul won't be trashing me on that. And Paul's also been a gamer since he was very young. And so that's also led to his thinking around new possibilities with technology. So definitely an innovator, definitely a disruptor, and definitely somebody who has a different perspective on life and not afraid to say it how it is. My other guest today is Darren Williams. Darren is the lead innovator here at Yorkshire Housing. He joined Yorkshire Housing last year, just after lockdown started, and he's worked in housing for probably around 6 years. But before that, he worked in benefits at Wakefield Council. But actually, he saw the light and moved into IT and technology, which was his real passion. He's also a keen gamer, so we've got a bit of a sort of theme going on here. And he's also an avid reader of sci-fi, and he confesses to the fact that Star Trek has absolutely influenced his everyday life. And I can't do the sort of sayings or the sort of hand gestures, so I'm not even going to try. All I remember is Lieutenant Uhura with a great big thing in her ear trying to get a radio communication. When he's not experimenting with new technology, he enjoys long walks in the countryside. And whilst the rest of us during lockdown rediscovered baking of bread, Darren discovered the delights of woodworking. So I need a new dining room table. So looking forward, Darren, to something being knocked up in the next few weeks. He's recently been involved in the dreaded D word. Now, I know for Paul, this will send a shiver down his spine. After DroneGate a few years ago. Look it up, #DroneGate. But Darren's been working with the Connected Places Catapult and looking at the use of drone technology. He's also been looking and working on the HomeLink pilot, as well as smart home proof of concepts and things like remote boiler management, which again is something that Paul and I have been banging on about for years and years. So that's the panel today. We're going to kick off straight into it, as we always do. So Paul, you're arguably one of housing's most radical thinkers, if not the most radical thinker. You like to push the boundaries. You like to sort of irritate and prompt a good debate. So from your perspective, what what's the home of the future look like, and what does it feel like? Walk me through how that would look and feel.
Thanks for inviting me, and I apologise for interrupting you. Okay. I'll follow the rules from now on. I think there's a number of elements to the home of the future. I think, first of all, as we've spoken about previously, the actual innovations around the kind of the components of the home and the interaction of the components of the home has not been a source of great progression over a number of years, really. And the example I kind of compare it to is like, if you look at kind of like how aircrafts kind of developed over the past few decades, there hasn't been great innovation there necessarily in terms of the overall experience. They are undeniably safer, and I think we've done a lot of work in housing to make our homes much safer. If you just even look at kind of the instances of fires in this country and what fire brigades spend their time on, house fires have really, although there's been a few high-profile tragic incidents, generally our homes and the way we maintain them are much safer. But if you think about the experience of moving into a home, of living in a home, of how you interact with your home or even your landlord, I don't think we've seen great progression there. It's very similar to, if you look at images of the experience of a consumer aircraft in the 1960s, it's more luxurious than it actually is today, unless you can afford to sit in business class or first class. But for most of us, the experience actually isn't fundamentally different. And I think it's much the same with the home, essentially. So I think there's great opportunity now to think about what that looks like. And my contention, and I'll pause there for a minute, is that I think we need a new operating system. We need to think about, actually, the way I kind of think about this is, you've got a number of elements that are particularly, we'll concentrate on social housing, but I think this applies to all of us, essentially. You've got, in the social housing space, you've got the people. So you've got the tenant, the customer, you've got a housing officer, you've got an engineer, you've got a physical asset, the home, and you've probably got some kind of emerging self-serve portal or something like that. But we haven't got a machine in the middle of it. We haven't got something like Google have done, where they've almost like planted a kind of an AI, a machine learning within our lives to think about how things are fundamentally easier. And I think, Google are a good example, I would say, of, many people would say to me, Paul, you're a fool, that you've essentially traded all your data over to this third party, but Google, I'm happy to do that, because Google have made my life easier. They've made it easier for me to make sense of the digital world and the physical world in terms of navigation around the globe, essentially. And if we think of that, about how that could be kind of transposed to our interaction within the home, how we use components within the home, how landlords pick up information within the home, how there's a machine in that loop. We put a machine in that loop to better, to make it much more efficient for all of us. I think there's a huge opportunity there that we haven't even begun to properly imagine yet.
Great sort of comparison there in terms of the airline industry, and I think that sort of really resonates, and that's one I'm going to steal with pride, because I think that is a really good one. I will of course copyright it for you there, Paul, as well. I'm interested really, because you mentioned Google, and one of the things that you've done which really stuck with me was when you did when the Bromford Lab did the work with Google Glass. And I remember that you did, you gave them to customers who were viewing properties, and you were sort of saying that actually some of the things that they were looking at were completely at odds with where we were spending money and what we felt were important to customers. I mean, just unpack that a little bit more, because I just thought some of that was absolutely fascinating, and it has, interestingly, it's continued to change my mindset and my sort of conversations with colleagues around voids, but also just anything similar that you've got in the pipeline at the lab as well. I think, again, be really useful and really interesting for people listening to this podcast to know, the sorts of things that people like you, and I'm going to come to Darren in a minute, but people like you and Darren, are working on at the moment.
Yeah, great. And I think, that does link up in terms of what we're both working on and thinking about. So just as a kind of backtrack, Google Glass was a kind of very early stage eyewear that allowed the user to overlay digital information within one eye and actually kind of, give functionality of things like Google Maps within the eye and also record things. It crashed and burned quite early for two reasons. One, people look like complete idiots, basically, and I had to summon up a lot of bravery to walk down the street wearing Google Glass because everybody thought you looked a complete idiot, and you did. And privacy concerns, because it was actually, a few years ago now, and the idea of being recorded by people in the street was something that seemed a little creepy. Now, that went away, but that technology is still being developed by Google. Facebook are launching their own glasses shortly, virtual eyewear, Apple as well. It will come back. It will come back in some kind of form to think about how we move the information on our smartphones to a visual field. So yeah, back in the day, so what we did was a sort of proof of concept about what would happen if we actually recorded the experience from a tenant moving into a new home, pure from their perspective. We did it from the housing officer perspective, and also from the tenant perspective to see what they picked up. And what was interesting about it, Nick, we've shared previously, is what they looked at that we didn't when they moved into a home, because very noticeably, we were looking at things from, obviously, a landlord perspective, not a customer or tenant perspective. So, for instance, one of the things we found out that we hadn't even thought about was the amount of time tenants spent when they were going on kind of an inspection of a home or preparing to move in, looking outside the window. If they look out the property for the view, they were looking at garden space, they were looking over other properties, they were looking about kind of the neighborhood generally and everything, something that we never looked at all. So what that made us kind of think about was about actually how do we design those processes from a much more tenant-led perspective. Now, I would say there, when you said about what we're doing next or whatever, I don't think we've moved on anywhere near as fast as we could have with that. And I was talking to a colleague the other day who said this thing about, goes back to what I said about putting a machine in the system. What would happen if you really did interact and pick up what a person moving into the home was picking up from day one? And I think there's huge amounts of possibilities there. I'll just say one thing before you hand over. Here, I've got to be very careful in terms of I don't appear to kind of blame tenants for damage or anything else like that. That's not where I'm coming from. If you think about, this is the single most expensive a housing association does, build homes and repair and refurbish homes. And we hand over the keys to an asset that I'll just say it's worth 200 grand for argument's sake or whatever, to somebody with no instruction whatsoever. You're literally just handing keys over or whatever, then get on with it. You might give somebody an instruction about how the boiler works or something like that. And we all know, Nick, when you hand the keys over at that point, the person's not even listening to what you're saying anyway. They want the keys and they want to move in. And then we have problems sometimes down the line, because of how the property has been lived in or maintained. And then we almost like blame people for that, in that sense about, well, why didn't people open the windows? Why is there condensation in these properties? Now, I know I'm not tenant blaming here, because I know what I was like when I first moved out of home and when I became a student and lived with 5 other lads, and we got socks in the microwave, put jeans on the radiators all day, all night, put things down the toilet that were not meant to go down the toilet. And I know the problem that we caused. We didn't know. It wasn't actually ill will or malice. Now, if you think about how we could plant a machine in that loop to think about actually how people can, run the home more efficiently, look after the home more efficiently. But going back to the Google Glass example, see it through their eyes, not through ours. I think that is a huge possibility. And I would, it's one of the things I really do want to look at collaborating with other housing associations on.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'm coming to Darren in a second, but I'm sure we'd be really keen to sort of speak to you and work with you on that. I think that whole point about the Google Glass and the learning from that, I just think it's just so incredibly powerful. When people talk about housing associations listening to customers, well, there's probably no better example than that in terms of saying, well, actually, all the money that we were spending internally in the property, but actually, if the garden was overgrown or if we hadn't really sort of cared for the surrounding area, then of course we're human, aren't we? You've got friends and relatives coming to your front door. If the journey to your front door is a shocker, you're going to meet them down the road, aren't you? And you're going to feel ashamed of where you live. And I think it's just that whole thing. And you're absolutely right, Paul. The whole thing about expecting people to sort of really clock instructions around when because moving home, I was on a sort of a webinar the other night, and I think moving home is one of the most exciting things you do in your life, and all you want is the keys and get in there. You're not listening to a single word anybody's telling you, whether it's about the sort of payments or how things work. You just want to get in, you want to get your stuff in and start living your life there. And I think where we need to probably get back to is probably going back 3-4 months later once the dust has settled and people are in a much more receptive way of hearing that. I want to come back to how about how we can do more with customers around use of smart home tech. But just before I do, I'm going to flip over to Darren if I can. And Darren, I know you've been trialing a whole host of kit, and you do a very good job of trying to keep me at arm's length and not get too involved and too excited by it all. So is there any learning you can share both with me, because you do a good job of keeping me at arm's length, but also with others listening to the podcast? What about those that are thinking of going down this path? What's worked, what's not? What advice would you give them?
So it's very interesting what Paul was saying there about putting the machine in the loop and giving that education to the tenant. We're currently working on a project with a company called HomeLink. So HomeLink are an IoT company that were bought last year by ACO. ACO supply many of the smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors to the sector. So these sensors that we're putting into homes will be temperature and humidity sensors that will look for conditions that might let things like mold and condensation flourish. And there's a resident app which will then give feedback, and it's very simplified, kind of a little gamified. There's a picture of a house. It has a smile on it if everything's good. If it's not good, the house starts crying. But there's some really interesting insights from that tenants, and certainly I myself probably didn't pick up. Air quality and ventilation's really important, especially in older houses. I live in a 100-year-old house, and certainly we were getting a bit of condensation in here. And the simple answer to that is open the window for 15 minutes. What you can see though with this resident app is that might drop the temperature in that room by 0.5 degree. But actually it'll flush all the air out. These sensors also do carbon dioxide detection as well. So it'll sense the air quality, although it's only looking for carbon dioxide. The thought is carbon dioxide keeps bad company. So if there's a high proportion of carbon dioxide in the room, there's probably other stuff in the room that you don't want there as well.
That sounds like one of the people who used to live in Paul's house when he was a student. There must have been a carbon dioxide. It was one of those 5 that he lived with.
Oh, that resonated with me as well. I was in a similar situation, but there was 9 of us.
Oh, blimey, gosh. Oh.
The HomeLink trial is really good. And the other thing that the HomeLink trial is showing us as well is the modern methods of connectivity. So all of this technology is going to rely on actually being able to access data and being able to show that data to the landlord and to the resident of the home. Previously, this would always rely on something like Wi-Fi, which gets expensive. We can't assume that it's in everybody's home. The HomeLink trial that we're doing is using a technology called LoRaWAN, which is a wide area, low power radio system, and we're utilising a network that has been set up by Leeds Council. What that means is, because it's so low power, the sensors will last for 7 to 10 years rather than 7 to 10 months. So it's a lot easier. It should be a lot easier for us to scale this up and manage it in the future.
Do Leeds Council know you're hacking into their network?
They do. Yeah, they offered us the opportunity to work with them on this project.
And what sort of cost, Darren? What sort of thing if people are listening in and thinking, oh, that sounds good, but it's going to cost me an arm and a leg? What's the ballpark on it?
So for these, the ballpark would be about 300 quid for the sensors, about £100 each for 3 sensors, and then that will include the data cost as well for a couple of years. And I think the data cost after that is it's sort of minimal, 50 quid for 6 years or something like that.
But I suppose it's that versus the cost of dealing with damp or condensation or a disrepair claim. Even it's offsetting. So yeah, absolutely get that. Other one from me, Darren, is I believe you have dared to tread where many others have stepped away from. And you've reopened up the drone debate. I can feel DroneGate hashtag coming back to haunt me and Paul. But again, it's something that's been doing the rounds for a while, but people have never really sort of, I think, grasped hold of the sort of benefits of it. Although it has helped Paul to feel like he's abroad again by getting his drone footage back and realising that that's what it looks like from a plane. But Darren, just tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to recently on that front.
Yeah, sure. So we were approached by the Connected Places Catapult to get involved in a demonstration to show the use of drones within social housing and the benefits that they can give. We had a look at some use cases. The two sort of things that stood out to us really were using drones to more safely inspect high-level areas. And then the other one was about thermal inspection. So checking the energy efficiency and the heat loss of our properties by sending a drone over with a thermal camera and looking for leaks. Now, those thermal inspections work best at night and in the colder months because they're looking for a difference in temperature between inside and outside. We did this demonstration in middle of June, so it wasn't exactly the best time. So we doubled down, we focused on the high level inspections. We inspected 3 locations. One of them was a converted church, which has got 34 leaseholders in it, which was very difficult to inspect. Previously, I had a ground-based inspection done that didn't really give the full picture. So over about a day and a half, that particular location was fully mapped out, fully photographed. And then out of the back of that, we've had a full 3D rendered model from it as well. And we've actually had a BIM model developed for us by a BIM company called Twindit. I think it really shows the use, the benefits of it. There was sort of 2 or 3 guys on the ground. There was no scaffolding needed, no cherry pickers needed. So you're already saving time and money. You're not having the lead time to get the scaffolding put up. What we did find from that was we were a bit worried that tenants wouldn't be accepting of the drones. So we wrote to all of the residents in these areas, all the leaseholders, all the tenants, and we told them what we were doing. We told them why we were doing it. And then to make sure we could capture any concerns or questions, I put my mobile number on the letter to take any questions. We didn't get any, none at all. Right. On the day when the drone was up, we had a few people come over. There was no concerns. They were just interested to see what was happening, had a chat with the drone operators. I think what we learned from there is that tenants are a lot more accepting of some of this technology than assume they are.
Yeah, I think Paul, you carry some scars from this, don't you, in terms of customers' views versus the sector's views on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things there, I mean, that resonates so much what you just said, Darren, because, when we did, some drone trials ourselves, but actually it's not about drones, it's about any technology. Actually, reaction often, both from the sector and also sometimes internally from our own management sometimes, is around, you can't do that. And excuses will be trotted out, such as we all know, people don't have access to Wi-Fi, when, as you've just alluded to, connectivity is not just down to Wi-Fi alone, first of all. People won't, they won't want that imposition on their lives. They won't want that data recorded. We had exactly the same experience with you on the drones, but also on sensor trials ourselves, where people said, actually, people won't want their landlord monitoring them within the home. Well, guess what? They will if there's a benefit to them, won't they? Because this whole talking about tenants as if they are some subspecies, fundamentally different. to anybody else, people want their lives made easier or cheaper or more efficient or easier to do, whatever. And anything that will give them a kind of glimpse of that, they're going to get into it. So I think your point about that is really important, that sometimes I think we listen too much to the outer voice outside our organizations, and sometimes the inner voice as well about the things we shouldn't be doing. But, you know, even the regulations, as you know, Darren, around drones has eased. That was one of the barriers in the way of whether you could kind of use them in a kind of a commercial or not a commercial sense. But I think a lot of these are kind of myths that we need to collectively bust if we're to make the progressions, you know, that we would like to have seen. I think, Nick, you and I would probably agree that the ambitions that we had for kind of smart homes maybe 5-6 years ago haven't been progressed maybe as much as we'd like. And I think some of that is that internal voice holding us back.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Paul. And I sort of described it internally to some colleagues the other week as I still feel like, you know, we're living, it feels like you've gone into a Tesla showroom and somebody's wheeled out a 1985 Ford Escort with, you know, windy up windows and a choke and all that sort of stuff. There's some people listening to this going, what's a Ford Escort? What's a choke? Windy up windows? You know, what is it? It's some horse-drawn carriage. But I think the tech is there, and we know the tech is there, and we know its ability to make our homes. You know, the one I always get absolutely staggered by is why we still have keys for a property. Why do we use 16th century technology when actually, you know, I open my phone with sort of with you know, either my fingerprint or my facial rec. I can open my car just by walking up to it with my phone in the pocket. But I then have to find some sort of 16th century set of keys to get in my home. And also how much we spend as a landlord doing lock changes every year, whether that's because people have lost their keys or because people have left the property without giving us notice, or just because from a security point of view, we want to change the locks, say on tenancy turnover. And you just think all of that, it just seems like a complete nonsense. And you know, this isn't new, is it? Because you walk into a hotel and the first thing they give you is just a little card. And so that's how you get in your room. And yet, you know, we just seem to be miles behind or something. So sorry, Paul, I'm venting. It's cathartic. It's like a counselling session, this for me.
I like your venting. And I think there's some of those things that we have to accept in some sense, that the risk averse from within our organisations is there for good reason, actually, because look at what we do. You know, we're giving people homes, we're supplying homes, and there are all sorts of issues that come with that. So it is higher risk than just giving somebody a card for a hotel door where you can call someone out straight away from reception. However, you're correct, Nick, that the year on year the technology progresses. So one of the things that's said about like keys was around, oh, you know, well, these things aren't secure enough. Well, you know, Face ID is pretty secure, okay, unless somebody's got the same face, you know. So
it's like, another one might mind, believe me.
You get a copy of that, exactly. So it's like, you know, it's exactly that, isn't it? So there's things that, you know, and that's why we should look to those kind of markets. We should look to those kind of innovators and companies, because if they're making everything is in your phone, isn't it? Absolutely everything. If I can log on to my bank with Face ID, okay, we surely should be able to solve the key problem at home.
I think that's a really good point. That, and I go back to when I was 16 and started working in a filling station and taking credit cards, and you swipe them through a machine and take carbon copies and physically compare a signature that somebody's written, and you think, how secure is that these days? You know, compared to now, you take your phone out of your pocket, you unlock it with your fingerprint and scan it on the contactless payment.
And that's where, Darren, I think maybe, you know, this is my glass half full moment rather than half empty, is that maybe COVID and the pandemic will be an accelerant of those things as much as anything else, you know, both in terms of people's adoption, because they've had to adopt things. You know, I know from, like, you know, speaking to my mom and a lot of her friends or whatever, so people are in the kind of late 70s, early 80s or whatever, that they've adopted technology in ways that they didn't do previously. So I think, you know, if I hear anyone in the housing sector now start saying tenants aren't ready for it. I'm just done with that conversation. I'm not even to have it anymore.
Yeah, with you all the way, Paul. With you all the way on that. We'll be right there on the barricades with you. I think I want to pick up on that actually, because I think it was a point that you raised before, both of you, interestingly, in various ways. And I suppose, if we are able to sort of get more of a smart home type solution offered, and our homes start to feel more like it's 2021 or 2022 rather than 1950s, there is helping people. It's a bit like the same transition that you need to make from a fossil fuel car to an electric car. There's a different way of using it, even though you know what the basics are. So I'm just interested in both your views, really, in terms of how we help our customers make that transition, because not in a patronizing way, because in the same way, I've tried to kit my home out to be as smart as possible, but I still have to educate both myself and indeed some of my family who still struggle with some of the stuff that they get really frustrated I've introduced. So just again, any thoughts really on how we take people who might have lived in the same way for say the last 20, 30, 40 years into, introducing them to a completely different environment, as I say, similar to how the automobile industry is having to change?
I'll go first then. So I think this is the important bit, isn't it? Because this is the behaviour change. The technology in one sense is the easy bit. I think we have got to think more creatively around how we take people on that journey, as you say, Nick. And that is, as you say, is not patronising. That's thinking about how we do that. We collaborated with another one of the catapults, actually, the Energy Systems Catapult. They have a series of, they call them living labs. It's about 100 homes that are kind of fully kitted out, and they do behavioural observations. They do interviews. The homeowners, they are part of the experiment. They are actually feeding into how you can maximise and use this technology, but also how your behaviour changes as a result of it. And we put 5 of our homes, because they hadn't got any tenants on the programme, into that. And it was fascinating in terms of what we kind of picked up and what we kind of learned. And what I think we probably need to do is to almost build upon the kind of experiments that kind of Bromford Lab have done, what Yorkshire Housing are doing. They are great, but we now need to think about how we connect them. Maybe across the sector, and think about, our customers, our tenants as partners in this, to think around, you're not being experimented upon from a landlord. We are experimenting together on actually, does this make your life more efficient? Does this make the running of our homes more efficient? Something you alluded to the other night, Nick, about if I do make your operating costs more efficient, what's in it for me? What do I get as a result of those things? So I think we need to probably now think about actually how we kind of join up some of these technologies, but actually have a different relationship with our tenants about actually the user experience and how they can actually take part in that. But as you say, behaviour change can go really quickly. COVID's a really good, example of people sanitising hands or wearing masks. Behaviour change can happen overnight, but that's usually when it's mandated. We don't want to be, I was certainly speaking for Bromford, we don't want to be mandating to our tenants how they should kind of live their lives. It's got to be a partnering thing. It's got to be something we share the benefits of both.
Yeah, please, whatever you do, don't speak to Mrs. Atkin, because she'll be saying, why didn't you sort of co-design some of the stuff you brought into our house before you just brought it in and switched it on? So, but no, it's really, really powerful points. And I think you're right, Paul. For me, this is the crux of the issue, the behavioural change. And it's not just amongst our customers, it's also our own mindset internally as well, isn't it? So, Darren, anything you want to add to that?
I think it's about partly as well making it as seamless as possible and as easy, almost invisible. There's the Arthur C. Clarke quotes, any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And basically we want to inject a bit of magic into our tenants' lives, our customers' lives. I think as well it's about joining it up. So currently we have a lot of different providers for this sort of technology, and every provider wants to sell you their own app, their own dashboard. Even in my home, I've got one app for the heating, I've got another app for the lights. I do use other systems that then collect that all together. But I think it is about joining everything up and giving the customer a holistic view of their home, rather than here's a view of your temperature, here's a view of your security cameras or something. And it is about, like Paul says, it's about working with the customer to understand what's of value to them, what are the most important things, and basically take them on that journey. Start with the most important things, and once they start seeing the value in that, they become a bit more accepting to the next bit along the way. Yeah, it's got to be done in collaboration.
Yeah, bang on, absolutely bang on. It's always a sign of a fab discussion when you realise that you're in the last 5 minutes and it's a quick fire round, and that's exactly where we find ourselves. So I'm going to flip over to some quick fire questions. So veterans of this podcast will know this is where our guests get literally 1 or 2 word answers to a series of interesting questions that lift the lid on what really makes them tick. So, Darren, first one to you, and it could be career limiting if you get this wrong. Apple or Android?
Android, I'm afraid.
Oh, Paul, come on, save yourself.
Apple. I had an Android experience 5 years ago, and I'm still receiving counselling for it. So
that's why I love you, Paul. That's why I love you. Right, next one. As big gamers, I'll come to you first, Paul. PlayStation or Xbox?
Oh, that's a hot one. I'm split, but I've erred onto PlayStation.
Oh, Darren?
PC.
Oh,
virtual reality.
Oh, very, very controversial. Right, just while we're still on games, best game you'd recommend to somebody who's never gamed before?
I'd say start with Zelda and work up from there.
Work up from Zelda. Darren?
The original Super Mario Brothers, it teaches you how to play the game itself.
Oh,
yeah, I was going to go with that, actually. I was just, that's a good one.
Even Jade, our producer's nodding at that one. So yeah, you've definitely struck a chord on that one. Okay, next one. Other than all your Android devices, Darren, worst gadget you've ever bought?
Oh, I bought a mini disc player once when I really should have bought an iPod.
There you go, Apple. You see, I rest my case. Paul, worst gadget you've ever bought?
Do you remember when people used to take Discmans into gyms?
Oh, and yes.
How embarrassing was that? I mean, this is kind of age, Nick, but I remember buying a gym Discman and then seeing people walk around with these little things, and I was like, what the hell have they got? And they were like the very early kind of MP3 kind of iPod things, and I was like, I'd look like a complete freak.
Yeah, and if you ran with them on, it used to jump all over the place as well, which is completely the point of it. Yeah.
One thing at a time, and it jumped about all the time. Absolutely useless.
Oh, right. So let's flip it round. What's the one gadget you'd take with you on a desert island? And as it refers to desert island, got to come to you, Paul, first, because you've doubtlessly taken one somewhere.
Well, I'm going to cheat on this because I would say my mom and my other half always say your phone is perpetually attached to your hand. So I'm going to take it as a given that I've got my phone. So yeah. I'd say AirPods or any Bluetooth.
Oh.
I think Bluetooth, speakers or headphones are a major breakthrough.
Okay, great stuff. Darren?
If I've got power and connectivity, it'll be the phone. The portal to the world's collected information would be useful on a desert island. If I don't have those two things, it'll be a Swiss Army knife.
Oh, wow. This is eclectic. Not what I was expecting. So whilst we're on desert islands, now we're opening up post-lockdown, and also as we have housing's most intrepid traveller with us today, Paul, that is you. What's your favourite holiday destination? Got to come to you first on this, Paul.
I'd probably say region. I like Southeast Asia. I like the kind of, they're incredibly young, incredibly diverse, incredibly innovative and creative. I think you will see a load of innovation coming from that region over the next 10 years, and I love the culture.
I have to say, really inclined to agree with you. I absolutely love Thailand, just amazing. And by far and away, much better connectivity than I ever get in the UK, which is just, you can be in a beach in the middle of nowhere and you've got 100 meg sort of connectivity on Wi-Fi. You just think, how on earth is that possible? Darren?
For me, it'd probably be the lakes or North Wales, because I like to take the dog with me when I go on holiday.
Yeah, you can't beat one of those beaches in North Wales on a cold autumnal day, the dog just running down the beach. Yeah, absolutely get it. Right, okay, we've got just a minute or so left. So, most interesting person you've ever met? Darren?
I exchanged a nod with Jarvis Cocker, famous Yorkshireman, on a bridge in Florence once.
Wow. Paul?
I think Richard Branson. I did a speaking gig and shared a green room with him. I would say he was like top of the bill and I was like number 30 on the bill. But I did meet him and I did have a chat with him.
Oh, and impressions of him?
Really nice guy, very shy guy, actually. It was quite impressive to see how he kind of turned it on when he came on stage, but behind the scenes, he was very quiet.
Right, okay. Last one from me then. So the last 18 months, a bit of an understatement, but but they have been pretty disruptive. And Paul and Darren, you both referred to that. Give me one prediction for the next 12 months ahead. Darren, come to you first.
I can see augmented reality and virtual reality becoming more popular, especially if Apple release their virtual reality device. I think that'll be what kicks it off.
Great stuff. Paul?
I mean, I'm going to be a bit generalist. I think, we've got to expect the unexpected. No one could predict what's happened, and nobody can accurately predict what happens next as a result of the fallout of how we've spent the past 12, 18 months. So I think the main thing for me is, not to be held back by your kind of pre-existing prejudices and the way you've always kind of done business, and shake out of that. That will be a good next 12 months.
That's great. Superb. And what a fantastic way to end. I've got loads and loads of sound bites that we're going to take out of this. So I'm really looking forward to playing it back and pulling those out as part of the promotional material, which reminds me to thank everybody who is listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for making the time. A massive thank you to both Paul and Darren for taking the time out to sort of contribute to this podcast. Our next episode builds upon this. It's the Future of Homes Part 2, which talks about the role of shared ownership. So please keep an eye out for that. Please don't forget that you can find this and all our other previous episodes of Raising the Roof via your usual podcast provider. But that's it for me. It's a wrap. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next time.